Good evening and welcome to the regular City Council meeting for the City of St. Peter. It is Monday, February 27th, 2023 at 7 p.m. We are now called to order. Would all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next up on our agenda is the approval of the agenda. We all have a copy in front of us. Are there any revisions or corrections to the agenda? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the agenda as distributed?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor of approving the agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The agenda is approved. Next up, approval of the minutes. The minutes are printed in our packet on pages 5 through 8. Are there any revisions or corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the minutes as distributed?
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes are approved. Next up on our agenda is a time for visitor comments. Is there any member of the audience who'd like to address the council on any agenda item? Hearing none, we have time for general visitor comments. Is there a member of the audience who'd like to address the council on any matter whatsoever? Hearing none, we will move on to the approval of the consent agenda. The consent agenda begins with the memo on page 9 of the packet and concludes with the resolution on page 29. The resolution approving the consent agenda includes the following budgeted purchases in excess of $25,000 to McQueen Equipment for a chain case assembly, to Globe Pro Cleaning for parks facility cleaning. The following renewal licenses: temporary on-sale liquor to the St. Peter Booster Club and to Nicollet County Ag Society. And the following employee appointment. There's a correction to the wage printed in the packet. That employee is Michael Wenner, a mechanic position at a wage of $32.72 an hour, as well as the schedule of disbursements for February 9th, 2023 through February 22nd, 2023. Is there any discussion on the consent agenda? Brad?
Joe, I have a question on the park cleaner. Last year, I believe there was some dissatisfaction with the cleaner. Is this the same cleaner from last year, or is it a new one?
If I could have you come up, Joel, and say who you are and answer. Thank you.
Joel Schmidt, Maintenance Superintendent. No, this is a different cleaner. The cleaner we had last year did not submit a proposal.
Okay. And was there any vetting done or background check or background done on the two that did submit proposals?
Yeah, informal, but local references.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Joel. Any further discussion of the consent agenda? Hearing no further discussion, is there a motion to approve the resolution on page 29?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Johnson,
Aye.
Mayor Noel,
Aye.
Councilmember DeVos,
Aye.
Councilmember Blumenflat.
Aye.
The resolution is approved. Moving on to unfinished business, our first item of unfinished business is the adoption of a resolution authorizing a recording of deed restrictions as required by Department of Natural Resources grant. Todd?
Mayor, members, the information starts on page 30 within your packet. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Some of you may have been aware of this at the time that we received the grant, and so you'll see some documentation within your packet along with some what I would call maps or diagrams related to Minnesota Square Park. As you know, part of the receipt rules for that grant, OR 22-071, indicates that we are required to ensure that essentially the park doesn't get turned into something else, that it continues to be a park, and that's the deed restriction requirement as a part of it. The work is substantially complete, well, really all complete, and so now is the appropriate time to take action to provide for that deed restriction. Again, there's some mapping in your packet on pages 32, 33, and so on. It goes for a little bit, but the resolution for this is on page 41.
Any questions for Todd? Hearing no questions, the resolution authorizing recording of deed restriction for Minnesota Square Park as required by Department of Natural Resources Outdoor Recreational Grant is on page 41 of the packet. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved. Second?
We have a motion and a second. Call the roll, please.
Mayor Noel,
Aye.
Councilmember DeBosse,
Aye.
Councilmember Bruflat,
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
The resolution is approved. We will move on to new business. The first item is adoption of a resolution establishing No Mow May.
Mayor and members, this is something that you worked on last year, and it was kind of done in short order. So this year, based on some of the experiences that you had, your community had, that staff had, we've developed more of a full plan related to No Mow May. And so I'll mention the work plan a little bit, which you'll see on page 43. And really what I'm asking you to do tonight is to approve the program and the plan, but more technically, it sets dates for registration and enforcement. For example, if I was a participant and I was participating in No Mow May, I'd have to have my lawn mowed again for enforcement by that June date that's stipulated in the resolution. My recollection is it's June 12th. I picked that and wrote that in there, not for any greater idea than it gives a couple of weekends for somebody to be able to get that done, as an example, to be able to mow and catch up. But really, the goal is to promote and provide for a registration process, provide for signage for households to get or utilize to indicate that they're a participant and promote it with their neighbors, provide for registration from April 1st really to that 1st of May. Again, compliance would be set for June 12th. And so if someone is not a participant, they might receive ordinance compliance notice in advance of that. So to get that, what I would call a waiver till June 12th, someone has to be a registrant and participate in No Mow May. And then we'd start notification efforts after that time. And then, of course, we'd try and follow up with the council, see how it went this year compared to last year, and if there are any tweaks or major modifications that you want to make going forward. One last thing that I'll mention, I know the council was very interested at some points related to what's the signage going to look like. And because we didn't have the ability to have the Parks Board meeting get finalized with the contest that they have going on, we just might end up picking a little something. So hang in there with me on that one. We have some time frame that we have to work within to ensure that we can get signs. And again, the registration will take place and opportunity for people to have that signage. And that's hopefully will be an ongoing opportunity, and we'll be able to reuse those signs as well. So Madam Mayor, I think the information is, again, well put together. You've talked about this a couple times. The resolution is on page 44.
Questions for Todd? Carrie.
I have a question and then a comment. The question is, it looks like there's going to be two options for pickup for the signage. I'm sure more details will come out, but I was curious with the city administration intern, is there an office set up for that person, or will it be pickup in the city administration office?
Well, not to get into too much detail, but as some of you may know, that intern has now left. And so this was put together prior to that time. So the exact assignment isn't quite provided for yet, so hang with me, but there will be an opportunity to do it and to sign up down at City Hall. Just haven't figured out exactly where that's going to occur.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense to have two locations, not just the police department,
Yep.
but another location. And then I just wanted to, we've all, talked with the community service officer, but the community service officer really provided great feedback after the last program, and so a lot of appreciation for her work and helping us develop a better program for this year. Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie. Anything further? Emily?
I'll just echo Carrie's sentiments. I'm just excited that we were able to discuss this at length and put together a really well thought out program this year. And I'm excited about the registrations and especially to see what Todd comes up with for that sign.
It will not be my artwork, I can guarantee.
But anyway, thank you to city staff for the time they've put into this.
Agreed. All right.
The only
Well,
other comment that I would
yes.
have, Madam Mayor, is that, we got to have snow melt to get to this point. So I'm just throwing that out there.
It's
Gotta happen eventually, right?
I would hope.
All right. If there's no further discussion, the resolution is on page 44 of the packet, establishing the No Mow May program. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Call the roll, please.
Councilmember DeVos,
Aye.
Councilmember Bruflat,
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson,
Aye.
Mayor Noel.
Aye. The resolution is approved. We will move along to adoption of a resolution authorizing execution of contract with Southwest Minnesota Housing Partnership for administration of Small Cities Development Program grant funds for Parkview Manor Improvement Project.
So, Mayor members, as you know, you've actually received 2 grants for this project, which is primarily driven by a need to repair, replace the roof and HVAC systems. There are a couple other systems as well that are smaller in nature and less costly in nature, but that's part of this. And so you receive funding through the state of Minnesota through Community Development Block Grant, and you also received an earmark allocation through the federal government, through the U.S. Senate, House, and signed by the President. The total amount of this is about $800,000. There are a number of things that need to go on related to where the funding sources are and reporting that's required, not only in advance of project for the construction management and for contracting and bidding, but also as the project is ongoing and concludes, including reporting on Davis-Bacon, wage issues, all kinds of different things. This is something that, while we could do, is a little bit outside of our strength and something that we do very, very, very rarely. As you may recall, we contracted with Southwest Minnesota Housing Partnership at the initiation of the grant phase of this project to help us complete some of the finalized grant information, certainly for the state of Minnesota. And so a lot of the information that the state is going to be requiring through that development block grant and HUD is requiring is very, very similar. And so we can do this in a pretty efficient manner. Southwest Minnesota Housing Partnership has a lot of experience in managing these grants, and so it's recommended by staff that we engage them to do the work related to this grant. Now, to be clear, there will be some work that occurs over this summer and fall. By work, I mean getting things ready, bidding process, et cetera, but likely the physical work of this for Parkview Manor is likely to occur in '24. Unless something really great happens and the world changes really quickly on us and the ability to contract and do some of those things comes through. I do want to mention that these are really important dollars and that we do need to meet the federal requirements or the federal objectives for this, which really is driven by benefiting people of low to moderate incomes. And as we've discussed many times, Parkview Manor is a facility in town that is really geared towards seniors of your lowest income within our community. And so being able to provide this kind of assistance and housing opportunity is significant. And so we're really grateful for the grant dollars. And of course, we've got to make sure that we're dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's to ensure that we don't have any challenges related to receipt of those grant dollars. So the resolution in your packet is really allowing for the mayor and I to enter into agreement with Southwest Minnesota Housing Partnership to administer the grant, the contract, and the follow-up for these grant dollars.
Thanks, Todd. Any questions for Todd? Oh, Carrie and then Emily.
Todd, so is the council involved in the bidding process, just like we're involved in passing this resolution?
So in this instance, let me give you kind of a soft answer by saying, I think not. We're still working through the process of how these 2 grant funding sources can be melded together into one. My gut right now is that you would not. That would be done through the HRA. The federal dollars are directly allocated to the HRA. The Community Development Block Grant dollars are directly allocated to us. And so there's some discussion that's going on amongst the parties about how to make that happen more efficiently. So it could be no, but the parties could agree and say, well, let's all run it through the city council. But my expectation is that it is unlikely to come back to you in that manner.
So it runs more than likely through the Housing Redevelopment Authority?
Right. Likely what happens is that we would be in receipt of the CBDG grant dollars, and that we just have to account for that as a part of an audit, but you would not be managing the contract. We'd just be a pass-through for those dollars. I can think of a number of housing projects that have been similar to this with either deed grants or community development block grants, and so that's why I'm thinking it leads in that direction.
Thank you.
Emily.
I just have a comment. I just wanted to stress how, as a member of the board, the HRA, we've been talking about this since I started my tenure on that board in January of last year. I mean, this has been a big need for this, this facility for a long time, and it's just fantastic to see this grant money come through. Really, really glad that the federal grant and the state grant are able to be used in tandem. And big thank you to Todd and to Michelle Connor for their really, really hard work on this and sorting all of that out and making that work together so we can use all these dollars.
Thanks, Emily. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, the resolution approving a contract with Southwest Minnesota Housing Partnership for grant and project administration is on page 47 of the packet. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
one last item that I'd mention is that the sum that you see included in here is amount that's allowed as a part of the grant dollars, so we're not reaching outside of that, and there are programmed dollars for this activity. Thank you.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Bruflat.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Mayor Noel.
Aye.
Councilmember DeVos.
Aye.
The resolution is approved. Moving along to adoption of a resolution authorizing designating Commissioner of Transportation to act as agent for the City of St. Peter in receipt of federal transportation funds.
Mayor, members, this is a really important thing for you to approve with all the projects that we have coming up that are using federal dollars and certainly state dollars, but in this instance, federal dollars. The information starts on page 44. This is a contract, an agreement that we enter into with DOT on a quasi-regular basis, something like every 3 to 6 years, depending on rule changes and things that have gone on. The driver for this, as a new issue for you, is some of the changes that the feds have made, the Federal Transportation Group has made, related to the kind of information that needs to be moved back and forth relative to receipt of those federal grant dollars. Probably the most significant project you have going on this year relates to the project that's funded through APT and federal dollars that's going to occur near the McDonald's at Old Minnesota and St. Julian. So this is a contract that will likely last for a few years until some of the rules change again as you receive other state and federal funding. So we do have a list on the bottom of page 48 onto the top of page 49 that articulates some of the most significant changes there. And we mentioned DUNS numbers and unique entity identifier numbers. This is more the technical stuff of these contracts, not the substance of the contracts. And so, as is the case with just about all contracts that come before you, we need approval of the City Council to enter into this agreement. Again, this is not an unusual agreement. It's in a little bit unusual time frame, but something that the city has entered into before. This is what I would call a corrected or an improved version based on those federal rules. Again, the resolution's in your packet directing the city administrator and the mayor to enter into that agreement. And I'm looking for my page number. I'm sorry, I'm not turning my pages fast enough. 63. Yeah.
Are there questions for Todd? Hearing no questions for Todd, the resolution authorizing execution of Minnesota Department of Transportation Agency Agreement number 1052246 is on page 63 of the packet. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Mayor Noel.
Aye.
Councilmember DeVos.
Aye.
Councilmember Bruflat.
Aye.
The resolution is approved. Moving on, adoption of a resolution authorizing receipt of bids for refuse hauling contract.
So, Mayor, members, this information starts on page 64, and there's a lot of information in here starting on page 65. And on 65 starts what I would call a sample contract. We've used this as the discussion platform at a couple of previous workshops talking about what you want to see within your system for refuse and recycling. We've also talked about food waste. So the information that you see starting on page 65 is not the final version of the contract. It is substantially similar to the final version, but once we get bids back, then the contract will be finalized. And so you can anticipate that if you provide approval tonight, the approval being directing staff to solicit bids, that this will hit your website within the next week, and we'll start seeing receipt of bids for this really important contract. We should be on an appropriate timeline should you decide to change haulers. And I think you're in a good state relative to some of the environmental things that you wanted to look at. Some of the information that's been provided by Tri-County to assist you in making decisions about what you want to see happen, really with refuse, green recycling, brown recycling. And so I think we're in really great shape. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have, but again, the resolution here is directing staff to solicit bids. Your contract is over at the end of June, and so we're just in the right time frame to accept bids and provide approval. And what I would anticipate would either be your last meeting in March or your first meeting in April. That gives you a couple months to make sure that everything can move appropriately should a change occur. Happy to try and answer any questions that members might have.
Questions for Todd? I'm not surprised we don't have a lot of questions because we have talked about this extensively in workshops. Al Christensen came from Tri-County to speak with us about this as well, and so we've talked about it at length. The resolution authorizing receipt of bids for refuse hauling contract is on page 74. If there's no discussion, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Call the roll, please.
Mayor Noel,
Aye.
Councilmember DeVos,
Aye.
Councilmember Ruffo,
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
The resolution is approved. Next up, adoption of a resolution providing host approval for bond issuance related to Sunrise Meadow Housing Facility.
Mayor, members, this information starts on page 75, and I will say right at the onset here that your counsel on these issues, which is Taft, has reviewed this document and made suggestions to the resolution, which are incorporated in the resolution within your packet. While this is something that the council sees infrequently, it's not unusual, and you've had a number of projects over the past 10 years or so that make use of this type of funding, and then a request is received by the city council to really provide your approval for the funding that is coming through the sale of tax credits primarily. The project, as some of you are aware and have driven by it, has been in place for a number of years. From staff's perspective, based on the recommendation, certainly it's an appropriate time for this kind of activity to take place, including rehabilitation of that facility. And so from a staff perspective, we're supportive of this. I think it's important to note that while you're providing approval, you are not on the hook for any of this. This is part of the standard process through this IRS rules and through the issuance of this debt. So if something would go wrong related to this project, ultimately the taxpayers in St. Peter are not responsible for repayment of any part or portion of this debt. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. I believe that we have some folks in the audience that are here to listen to your discussion, or if you have any tremendously challenging specific questions, now's a great time for that, but I'm certainly happy to answer questions if I can.
Oh, Brad.
So yeah, I'm confused. It says a public hearing was held on January 12th, 2023.
It was. So under the new IRS rules, really driven by COVID, there's a way to do this through telephony, right? So a conference call and other ways. And so this isn't
But
necessarily.
this wasn't a city council public hearing.
Correct. But there was a public hearing, and it was noticed appropriately within the paper here. And so
And-
we feel good about that.
Okay, so how was the public hearing conducted? I mean, was it,
It's a
were-
call, it was calling.
did you just administer it then, or how?
No, actually, it was administered at one central location really for the breadth. This is tied to a number of other projects, and so it can be done once for all those
Okay.
projects.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good question. Any further questions for Todd? Hearing no additional questions, the resolution of the City of St. Peter approving the issuance of National Finance Authority qualified 501c3 bonds for a qualified residential rental project in an aggregate principal amount not to exceed $15,295,000 for the purpose of financing or refinancing the acquisition, rehabilitation, improvement, and equipping of Sunrise Apartments, 1435 Sunrise Drive, and certain other matters relating to thereto. Wow, that was a mouthful. That resolution is on page 77 of the packet. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Yes, Todd?
Mayor and members, before you are done with this one and take a vote, I'd hate to have people come from a large distance and not have the opportunity to explain the project just a little bit. So if I could, if you wouldn't mind coming up and giving name and address and how you're affiliated, and really what I'm looking for, I'd love to know a little bit more about about how many dollars or what rehab might look like for this facility that's really been in place for more than a couple of decades. So if you wouldn't mind.
Absolutely. Lee McCormick with the National Finance Authority, and thank you very much, Mayor and council members, for the opportunity to be here tonight. And joining me today is Jackson Crow, who's with Fairstead, who's currently property owner of the property. As city administrator said, this is really just one of those check those box types of things that the IRS makes a nonprofit like Flagstone go through to qualify their bonds as tax exempt and get a lower interest rate on those bonds. The majority of the bond proceeds are actually going to be used for purchasing the property, recapitalized property, which will allow them to reduce their borrowing costs, which helps them keep the rents low at the property, and also will free up cash down the road for capital improvements. From the bond financing itself, only about $300,000 is dedicated to capital improvements, and that'll be used for HVAC improvements at the facility at this point in time. But this is, as was mentioned, this is one property out of 68 that are being done nationally. So we did hold a national TEFRA hearing on January 12th, where we had a number of properties. Out of all the properties, we didn't have a single comment from anybody from the public, even though we had notices in all local papers. I think for the most part, these types of projects are very straightforward. People like seeing capital dollars go in. They like seeing lower cost financing go in, which helps with the rents, and which helps with the improvements down the road. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. And again, thank you for the opportunity. And the opportunity to see snow for the first time this winter. I'm from Dallas, so
Oh, my
aside from the
goodness.
small dusting, this is the first snow I've gotten to see.
It was all for you. We were
Thank
happy to
you,
make it
thank
happen.
Mayor members, the last project that you did that from a financing structure is very similar to this would have been Maplewood Apartments. I think that was about 5 or 6 years ago, give or take a little bit. So very similar process.
Any questions?
Just thank you for your explanation.
No, thank you guys, and thank you for staff. They did a very thorough job and were very, very wonderful to work with.
Wonderful. Well, with no further discussion, are we ready to vote? Do we have a motion in a second? All right, then let's call the roll.
Councilmember DeVos?
Aye.
Councilmember Bruflat?
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson?
Aye.
Mayor Noel?
Aye. The resolution is approved, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Our final item of new business tonight is the adoption of a resolution approving issuance of a tobacco license. And that memo is on page 79 of the packet.
Mayor members, you can see the information that's included on that page. This is for 624 South Minnesota Avenue, what we commonly call in St. Peter the Freedom Gas Station. To provide the background check was completed on Rizek, and nothing was found that would prohibit issuance of the license. So the resolution and the recommendation from staff is to approve the license, and that resolution's on page 80.
Is there any discussion? Brad?
Just so people clarify, so when they know my vote on it, this is just a transfer essentially of I mean, it's a new license.
Yeah,
for this
that's fair.
individual, but it's not an expansion of tobacco sales in town. It's just essentially one owner going to another.
Correct. As you know, if there's a new license, it comes to the council for separate action. Renewals, which are by definition the same holder, come on the consent agenda. But you're right, Brad. That's exactly correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion? Hearing no further discussion, the resolution approving a tobacco license application is on page 80 of the packet. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Bruflat?
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson?
Aye.
Mayor Noel?
Aye.
Councilmember DeVos?
Aye.
The resolution is approved. We will move on to reports. The only thing I wanted to report tonight was to just take a moment to remember former City Council member Margie Nelson, who recently passed away. She was an active member of our community, known by many of us, and she'll be greatly missed, and just want to extend my condolences to her family. That's it for me. Council members. Brad?
Well, I'd like to talk about a road trip the mayor and I recently took to St. James for a presentation hosted by both Region 9 and then the Climate Smart Municipalities Organization in Minnesota. It was about, it was, a lot of it was centered around a representative from Saarbrück, Germany, a community there that through very diversified portfolio of renewable energy, over time has now produces about 4 times their annual usage in renewable energy. It was also mostly members of the St. James community there discussing ways to advance renewable energy, not just renewable, clean energy in their community, and it's good for our community as well to participate in that. I also, the Climate Smart Municipalities Organization, they meet monthly, and every other month they meet with the German delegation. I've been asked to join that, so I'll be able to report back on ideas. It's really a collaboration of sharing ideas of what municipalities are doing, and also, you know, to gather information. Anyway, I thought it was a very good presentation, and just wanted to share that. So.
It was a fascinating presentation, and it was a great opportunity to learn, to interact with people in other communities in southern Minnesota. And so thanks for representing St. Peter as those meetings continue. Any other reports from council members? Hearing none, we will move on to reports from the city administrator.
Mayor members, the only one that I have relates to storm cleanup report, and so as your maintenance superintendent attends the meeting, we probably would put him on the spot and say, Joel, how's the snow moving? And there's a couple more days of work to be done. If you wouldn't mind maybe sharing the schedule just a little bit, that would be fantastic. We'd appreciate that. Your crews have worked really hard, and there's been a lot of work to do.
They have. Yeah, they continue to work hard. They worked hard last night doing the first phase of the downtown snow removal, which usually is enough. But with all the snow we got and the rain that happened overnight, it was a little challenging. So there'll be a second night of snow removal, downtown snow removal tonight going into tomorrow morning. And then the day after that, we'll clean up the parking lots downtown. Lots 2, 3, 4, and 5. 2, 3, and 4, sorry. So yeah, the rest of the week will be snow removal or snow cleanup to some degree. So.
Carrie.
How hindered are we by the temporary loss of the snow glow?
Essentially, not at all, but if we have any issues with the backup snow blower, then we're very hindered.
Okay.
So the importance of having that one back is huge, and it is more efficient. I shouldn't say not at all. It's more efficient than the older one, and it's generally more reliable as well. But yeah, we're lucky to have 2. I'll just say that. So we want to make sure we have 2 again.
We're lucky to have our city crews out there.
Yeah.
It's been a tough winter.
Yeah, they've done a great job.
Brad.
Well, I'm hesitant to say this because it might give you too big of a head, but Joel and I meet every Tuesday morning, so we have this banner. But this morning I had breakfast with someone who they and their spouse have previously, including last winter, been rather critical of the plowing process in town. And she said today she's been really impressed this winter with the job the city crews have been doing. She hasn't had a problem. She works at Gustavus getting up College Avenue at all. And so kudos to your crew, even people who haven't been happy in the past. I think you've been doing a good job this winter.
Well, thank you. I'll pass that along.
I'll second that as well. Of course, it's natural for all of us to hear complaints, but I've heard wonderful compliments on how well the city's streets are been cleared and maintained. It's been quite a year, and so again, thanks to the crews for all their hard work.
Thank you. I will pass that on to them tomorrow.
It's important for your community members to get those cars off the street, and so that makes such a difference. So the level of cooperation is very important related to not just not having tolls, not having tickets, but the quality of work that Joel's team can do in plowing it curb to curb, right? We like to say, you know, a street's happy when it can get plowed curb to curb. And so we appreciate folks being able to get out of the way and paying attention to the plethora of information we send out related to snow and snow removal and getting your cars off the street.
Well, thanks a lot, Joel.
Thanks, Joel. Madam Mayor, I don't have any other reports.
All right, hearing no other reports, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.